improving the product development process by switching to the Agile Scrum framework. Typical product development process uses the waterfall process. That process includes tasks such as requirements analysis, design, code, integration, test, and deploy. The problem with that approach is that if there are any issues that might occur within one of those areas of functionality, it can cause delays in future stages of the process. The other thing is testing occurs at the end, so if there are any major issues, it could force the process to start all over again, which could also cause delays. And it just doesn't adapt well to changes in the requirements, or as we would call it, scope creep, that might occur during the project. And any issues can really, as stated before, can force everything to start all over again. One of the things that I might note is that 90% of waterfall projects, it's been proven that 90%, or well, I wouldn't say proven, but researched by several companies, that 90% of all waterfall projects have some sort of delay or what have you. So really, there's not much room for success with those projects. Some of the examples that, and I'm using my company as an example here, some of the things that we've seen that cause delays in delivery or delays in our processes might be, and I'm picking on requirements quite a bit here because that's probably an area of frustration. Things such as incomplete or missing details, where we might be waiting on resource assignment help with completing those details, waiting on input from a business unit, maybe waiting on a business unit to even improve the requirements, waiting on input from engineering management, waiting on approvals from engineering management, and then design. The design may be held up because of the requirements aren't complete, or build could be held up because there's a delay in design. Then there may be some things related to networking, like there's not enough capacity. We may need to add, do some things to add more bandwidth. Some of the projects that I've worked on, we've seen things happen in our environment where we might have had to add additional hardware for routing or things of that nature. It might have been things such as telephone equipment or what have you that needed to be added. Or I've seen delays because we may have been building or setting up a new building, and things such as network and telephone equipment and wiring and all those types of things, there may have been some delay there. With Agile Scrum, the approach is to utilize a iterative process. Basically, each of the phases that you kind of saw in the previous slide or 2 slides back with the waterfall, those things end up being broken up into smaller pieces. Basically, we break the project up into smaller pieces, smaller deliverables, where we're basically delivering. Each iteration could be a set of features, if you will. And during each iteration, you're doing the design and the detailed requirements, the design and the analysis, the development, the QA acceptance testing, and then eventually the hope is that you'll have a shippable product. It might not be an entire product or a product suite that you might get with um, the waterfall approach, but it certainly would be um, something that's shippable, something that's probably smaller scale, um, and eventually with enough of these iterations, you would approach um, the desired overall list of products. The one thing is with product development, at least from a software standpoint, um, most products are living products, and there'll always be changes. There'll always be updates, things of that nature. Um, um, so even with waterfall, things are continuous. Um, there's examples of people using agile where the company might have decided, okay, we don't want to do any more iterations. We're done. And they may have gotten through half of the intended set of iterations, but it was still shippable solutions, great products, things that they were able to actually um, deploy to production, and their users were actually able to use them, even though they may not have completed, like, say there were 10 iterations planned, but they only completed 5 out of the 10. Well, those 5 were enough to sustain their business or sustain their customers. The Agile Manifesto, um, basically, what the manifesto does is it favors individual interaction over process and tools, working solutions or working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Whereas, traditional project planning, you got to stick to the plan. You got to make sure every, you know, duck or every task is accomplished. The issue with that is that a lot of times, the task may not be well defined. There may be missing information. There may be things such as um, integration points or what have you not being properly defined. All the resources not properly identified. Um, it just doesn't adapt well. And the problem is you don't usually find these things out until you're way down into the project. But with Agile and the iterative approach, and we'll get into that. With the Agile team, you have basically um, 3 roles: the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the Scrum team. The product owner is responsible for that list of items that go into those iterations. Those are called product backlog, which we'll get into those a little bit more shortly. And then what happens is the Scrum team, you have a Scrum Master that kind of facilitates um, much of the I guess the meetings of the Scrum team and the interactions between them and other folks or with other people outside of the team, or even making sure that they have whatever resources they need to be successful with the project. That's kind of Scrum Master's role. He really, in essence, even though a lot of times what's been used is that Scrum Master is really no one's boss, but in essence, he kind of is the manager of the team. He's making sure that um, that they are successful, even though he may not be directly bossing people around or telling them what to do. He's making sure that things keep flowing. The Scrum team, obviously, that's the team that's actually producing the product or doing the development. It's a cross-functional team. It could include application developers. Obviously, from some of the things that go on in iteration, it might include, testers. It's going to definitely probably include somebody from the business to do the user testing. If you need database access or something related to database, a DBA, just several network folks, just whatever is needed for a particular sprint. Those types of roles would be involved. Um, so with Scrum, as I mentioned, there's a product backlog, which is kind of a list of the features that are to be added, or that make up what's going to actually go into the product. And that list is maintained by the product owner. That's his sole responsibility. One of his main responsibilities to keep up with that list, maintain it, what have you. If other members of the group that he represents wants to add features or what have you, or add things to the project, they are not able to do that until at the end of the Scrum. Typically, you typically can't interrupt a Scrum at the end of a sprint. You typically can't interrupt a sprint. So changes would typically occur after a sprint is complete. Now, if it's something that's an emergency that has to happen, and the product owner does have the ability to stop the sprint, just tell the team, hey, let's come to a stopping point right now, and we need to work on this backlog item. This takes priority. But only the product owner has the ability to do that. Nobody else from his team, management from the functional areas of the Scrum team members, they can't do anything like that. It's only the product owners. It's quite a paradigm shift, because in a traditional project plan or traditional waterfall, you would see where a manager of an application developer, even though the developer is assigned to the project, the manager could kind of influence what that developer does. Well, really, the the members of the team are responsible to other members of the team, and not so much to their managers. So it's a paradigm shift, and so it's kind of one of the reasons why before all of this occurs, or before a company is able to move to this framework, that training and education starts at the top with management and works its way down. And of course, you have to get the commitment of the executive management team in order to move to this framework. So also, as a part of the moving to the Scrum framework, what happens is you'll have like a sprint planning meeting, which is when the team kind of negotiates with the product owner what they're going to include in the next sprint. Sprints are on average about 2 weeks. So like every 2 weeks, some companies are actually producing a shippable product that are using Scrum. They can go for as long as 4 weeks. Typically, once the sprint, what goes in the sprint is negotiated, the team will sit down and identify the tasks associated with each one of the sprint backlog items, or sorry, the product backlog items, and also how long it'll take to complete those tasks. Typically, those tasks may be, a lot of times there's less than a day. I mean, you break it, things are broken down so small and to such small granularity. I mean, a lot of times those tasks are hours, to a couple hours or what have you. But you're building, again, basically instead of building one large shippable product, you end up building one smaller shippable product, and that eventually gets you to the point, kind of keeps the customer happy, it keeps the business happy, and gets you to a point where you probably build enough, or have built pretty much the whole thing. At the end of a sprint, there's a sprint review meeting, which is when the Scrum team take meets with the product owner and presents to him what they've done, and they kind of basically go down that list of backlog items. There's um, a list of things that must be conformed to in order for those backlog items to be completed. Things such as tested, checked in, reviewed, tested, things of that nature. And then, of course, there are probably other specifics like, if the screen must be blue and there's certain scrolling writing across the screen afterwards. Those types of things are typically specified, and that's just an example. But at the end of the sprint review meeting, anything that isn't completed, it can be those items can be moved to the next sprint, which typically happens, or they can just go back into the sprint backlog and reprioritize by the product owner, who is responsible for prioritizing that list and maintaining that list of backlog items. And after that, there's what's called a sprint retrospect meeting. During the sprint retrospect meeting, the team basically reflects on what went well, what went wrong, and what they could do better to make sure those issues don't happen the next time. What will typically happen is after a couple of iterations, the team will begin to gel, and you'll actually see improvements. They're actually able to probably complete more backlog items, as the sprints progress and things of that nature. And that's really where the power and the speed, the power of Agile really benefits an organization, because the company is it's a continuous process improvement for the product development team. So as I indicated before, the team members basically indicate what the length of the task will be, and for each of the items, sprint backlog items, and you can actually take those lengths and those tasks. What ends up happening is they're put into what's called a sprint burn down list, and that sprint burn down list can be used to track the actual progress of the sprint, based on the time frame, how long each item takes. The screen line is the overall length, or the overall time frame from beginning to end. The start of the sprint, there'll be 150 hours, let's say, and at the end there should be 0. This blue line is showing actually how things are tracking as the sprint progresses. And of course, initially you'll see, which is kind of expected, initially everything's tracking slightly above the actual anticipated timeline, and then as you get closer to the end and things improve, everything tracks below, and then it actually hits 0. In fact, looking at this, it's like the items were actually completed overall before the designated time of the sprint was supposed to be, the designated period of time that the sprint was supposed to be completed. So to move to this framework, our proposal is a 3-year plan. The first year is purely doing things such as educating the executive team, educating the product group teams, educating the functional area teams, and doing the plan for how to roll out Scrum as a part of the various areas of product development. So year 2 and 3 will be splitting. Our proposal is we do 1/8 because there's 4 quarters, so we'll do, or not 4 quarters, 8 quarters, we'll do 1/8 of the product teams at a time. That's the goal anyway. It may not be quite accomplishable because all those teams may not have product deliveries planned within a time frame that's expected, but what can happen is we can move, well, we certainly will move things as they occur, but what can happen is we may, if things aren't moving as well as we'd like within a certain period of the project, we can certainly adjust and make sure that they do move, that products do move when expected, or move before the end of the project. The benefits of moving to the Agile framework would be faster availability of shippable solutions, because again, you're doing those iterations, and each iteration is a shippable product. You'll have be putting things into production much faster than that would happen typically with waterfall. The environment's more adaptable. In other words, every iteration, after each iteration, you have the ability to change direction rather than waiting for an entire huge project that's months long to come to a halt, or without disrupting that months long project. You can probably adapt or add features or reprioritize or what have you in between. It's much less costly to actually test during those smaller iterations rather than trying to test at the end. You test a huge project or what have you. Studies have actually shown that it's actually cheaper to test in smaller iterations. You don't have to test as much. You're just testing what's changed, and then also there's the potential to actually improve quality. Certain companies like GE Capital, which actually use the Agile Scrum approach, also utilize their Six Sigma practices as well as a part of this, and so they get a very high quality results from using both. So that concludes my presentation.